Do you want to introduce yourself first? You're the star of the show.
It's all about me. Oh my God. I feel so uncomfortable.
I'm just here to facilitate.
So, my name is Jelena Micić, and I'm not the moderator this evening. I'm so happy that we had opportunity to host Heather Davis, one of my very favorite theoreticians. I'm an artist, or at least I try to be most of the time, but I also have different engagements like other artists do nowadays. I heard it's cool, but I don't think it's cool at all. Sustaining lives with different jobs is kind of a tricky thing. Being an artist, I think, is in a way privileged, but we can discuss about that further. So, I would just give a word to Heather.
That's an amazing introduction. So we said we were going to introduce ourselves, so I'll just give you some sense of who I am, because I think you know who Jelena is, which is the reason probably why you're here. But you very kindly reached out to me and asked if I would talk to you about your work and about plastic in particular, which has been like a passion / obsession for me for at least the past 10 years or so. I'm an assistant professor. I work at the New School, so just in Manhattan. And I'm super excited to be here to talk with you. And I know that we have these slides to talk about, which I'm very excited to get into, but I also just wanted to give everyone a sense of the first time we met, which was just outside of the New School. There's this cafe just a couple blocks up. And Jelena was like, okay, well, let's do a studio visit. And you packed up all of your artwork into one of those rolling suitcases, and met me on the sidewalk outside this cafe and started to unfold everything, including this work. Although I think it was smaller at the time.
No, it's that one.
It was really just that. That's amazing. I can't believe you did that. But you can just imagine this being unfolded on Fifth Avenue around 5 p.m.
People are passing by, greeting us, taking selfies. No.
Exactly. Anyway, so obviously that was extremely charming, and I was very happy to continue to talk with you about your work and practice. But I think it says something about the kind of ethic that you bring to art making and art production. That I think is rare and beautiful and fascinating.
You mean anti-mystic and anti-protective?
Exactly.
Anti-mystifying, I
exactly.
would say.
Anti-mystifying, precisely. and I think really kind of pushing back against a lot of the art market stuff, which in this city is deeply
This we will talk
difficult.
about later when we talk about the value of collecting plastic-made artworks or objects.
But you had a brilliant idea of doing this as a show and tell.
Yes, because I never did a show and tell in my life, and it seems to be a very typical US thing, which has been practiced, this practice of presentation and standing for your work so strongly, comes, with education already in elementary school. So I find it really interesting to co-opt some part of American culture and try to practice it here. So you have a show part, those 3 artworks here, but you have a tell part as well. So we're going to try to practice this show and tell today. What I would maybe just add here at the very beginning, Heather didn't mention that she's the author of the book called Plastic Matter, which I'm really inspired by. And I would just like to read out a very interesting quote, which I really much relate to. So, start of quote: "The worlds of art, representation, and imagination now rest on plastic and oil as their basic substrate. Plastic is the voice or the agency of those long-dead plants and animals returned to be a lively presence in the world." End of quote. Yeah, I think you forgot that part, which is very important, because you have been dealing not like also like privately. Somehow your book begins with your relation or your interconnection, willing or unwilling, with this whole context of plastic. But we left this is the last slide to check in, maybe later on, how it works. So the title, Living with Toxicity, we will talk a lot about how toxicity is present willingly or unwillingly in our lives, how it affects human bodies, but not only human bodies, how this interconnection actually happens. And there are some very interesting parts of conversation that Heather is somehow very much engaged with in her book, saying that fossil fuels produce queer realities. I found this really interesting. It's something that like really brings us back to the like molecular level, that really like this being affected with your environment produces your gender. But this is now me imposing your words, and I would not like to do that. So could you maybe comment on this very shortly, how you see this? Because I find this really interesting, because if we are talking about willing or unwilling living with like toxicity and all of these materials that do affect us, and of course we affect them as well, how does this produce our not only identity but many other things? How does this affect like this kind of relation work? Something that would be very interesting.
I mean, one of the things that I like in my work as a theorist, and I think about a lot is like what are the kinds of preconditions for something like plastic to exist in the world in the first place, and then what does it do once it's here? And one of the things that I was really interested in is the ways in which plastic gets produced as if it is some kind of like discrete object, like as if it can be contained, as if it has, like it often operates as like a container or a barrier or something like this, right? So it kind of tends to reproduce this understanding that there is a discrete difference between our bodies and the world, and that those barriers can be maintained and they're solid, right? And what you see, obviously, is definitively not that. It's like anything but that. And so instead, what you have is this widespread, and part of the reason why I say that like this is how I think that people are understanding plastics or like toxicities or chemical relations in general, is because of the ways in which when you go back into the archives, you really see the ways in which both people are kind of genuinely really excited about the material, genuinely really think that they're producing a kind of new or better reality, but also the ways in which in that production you can really separate out the kind of negative and positive effects, right? That the negative effects will not affect the people who are producing it, and the positive effects will just remain, right? And that this is the ways in which this is going to go when people were sort of first starting to develop plastics. Obviously, as I said, and as we all know, I think that comes undone pretty quickly. And one of the kind of effects of that in relationship to queerness or queer theory is that, some of the chemicals that are associated with plastics, the kind of plasticizers that are added to make plastic, heat resistant or pink or pliable or whatever, which are all kind of added on to the kind of molecular chain that is whatever type of plastic it is. Those are often a class of chemicals called endocrine disrupting chemicals. And those endocrine disrupting chemicals do all kinds of things in the human body. So everything from early onset senility to diabetes to various forms of cancers. These have all been linked to endocrine disrupting chemicals. But one of the other things that endocrine disrupting chemicals do is there's some controversy over this, but there's been a fair amount of evidence that it is interfering with human fertility, our ability to actually, just sexually reproduce without assisted reproduction. And then secondly, that it's doing this thing that some people call feminization of male fetuses. So meaning that there's a propensity towards producing non-normative penises and testes, in addition to, in some places, the kind of birth ratios that are highly skewed towards women instead of, or people with vaginas instead of people with penises. And so I was looking at this and thinking like, okay, well, what do we do with that kind of a reality, and how do you not, in the face of that, there's been a lot of like homophobic backlash, and also a lot of backlash around being like, okay, well, we just need to prop up men and masculinity in the face of this. As a feminist queer person, this is like not where I wanted to go at all, obviously. And so instead, what I was really interested in is like, well, what can you do with that kind of a reality? Like, what's actually maybe interesting in that? And that doesn't, and when I say that, I don't mean that just means like, oh, we should all just be happy that there's all these chemicals that are causing all kinds of harm, throughout the world that we can't get away from, which I think your work really, really illustrates really beautifully, and really poignantly. But I also wanted to sort of ask after, like, what, like, if it's becoming increasingly difficult for humans to reproduce, what are we reproducing? So thinking about reproduction not just as our own bodies, but also as the kind of infrastructures that we reproduce and the other kinds of non-human creatures that we share the world with. And some of those things are the things that now eat plastics. So bacteria, mycelium, and these kinds of organisms. And so I think about that in relationship to a kind of non-filial human progeny, or a kind of toxic progeny, that I think of as very queer in the sense that it's, making family forms very much outside of the normative, heteronormative or homonormative structures of relation.
Yeah, you propose different kinships.
Exactly.
Different ways relating with also nature, and especially the synthesized nature, which you, as far as I understood, see completely in kind of hand in hand, or like being the new, or is just kind of part of the natural in a way. I mean, or should be. So embrace fluidity, and I think that, to start with, embracing this ambivalence around this material. I think this is something which I very much like to do, especially when it's targeted, like its use. I like to discuss this very much through my work. So here on the left side, you see my studio some years ago with different recycled materials, but on the right side you see my flat, which it's pretty similar. Somehow I do live with my material, and I started living with it pretty recently. And the moment when the material came into my, let's say, like, household, I became really stressed about it, I have to tell you, because I always believed that I could handle living with material, my material of choice, which is mostly plastic. But then when it was actually there, I felt this weight and this kind of actually occupation of my private space in a very weird way. So I'm trying to deal with this, kind of having to live and work in the same, in the same space somehow. I mean, visually it doesn't look so different, but mentally it looks very different. I mean, as you see, there is a lot of accumulation going on, and this accumulation has a lot to do with tracing different patterns of consumption. I will talk about it a bit later. There is also there is some sentence that I was really intrigued by from your book, but I didn't exactly. I had my interpretation, but I doubt it's something that you had in mind. So you said, I quote, plastic is valuable because it's meant to be wasted. Mm-hmm. How would you argue that?
I mean that just like in a very literal kind of basic economic way, that like because we exist in an economic system that doesn't account for any waste management, right? Waste management, unless it's a privatized waste management system, is all accounted for by the state, right? Therefore, it's all paid through taxes, and therefore we all have to suffer the consequences of having to deal with waste management. And companies don't. And so companies get to profit from the fact that, like, you know, the more and more stuff you buy, the more money they make, right? And the fact that you're meant to like just immediately waste, like put something in the garbage, obviously is a great economic model if you're a plastics company. So I just meant it in like a fairly basic kind of way, to be honest. But what was fascinating is that, like, you know, when you look back in historical in history, people had to be trained to do this. Like people were not accustomed to wasting things, especially after the Second World War, which is when you see the rise of plastics. Everybody, in fact, was used to recycling, was used to mending, was used to trying to save things, this was the mode that people were in. And so the move to kind of like the patterns of consumption that you're dealing with in your practice, and I think that like the massive proliferation of really kind of like mundane objects that you deal with in your practice that really, I think, have a real attention to questions of labor and to questions of feminized labor in particular, and into questions of domesticity and the relationship between domesticity and labor practices, that I think you really highlight in your work. Like all of that is being kind of reconfigured through this mass consumerism, or the ability to have a kind of waste or disposal based culture.
I have to like add to this because, for example, talking about these patterns, like, so plastic is meant to be wasted, and all of these generations, for example, my grandma, she would, like when I was a kid, I remember clearly, I mean, she still does it. She would keep the plastic bags. Mm-hmm. She would keep the like yogurt plastic bottles. She would wash them and reuse them. She still does this. So some people don't understand, or don't see this material as hostile. They don't see that it falls apart by each use. Older people would actually reuse it and until it's completely wasted. So I remember one moment when my mother came and threw away every single thing because that grandmother was kind of compiling, because she would just understand it as it's a bag, it's a usable, it's a container. She didn't see it, this is a plastic container. She saw it as this is usable or this is reusable. So I found this really interesting because they're it's counter-example of kind of plastic is there to be wasted by some generations. I would say something like this. And the generations that also before us, they were actually so much involved into using like natural materials like soil. So there is an artwork that I always like to come back to where there is a special soil which looks kind of whitish, and there is another one which looks kind of gray, bluish, and one of it, so the white one was used for washing clothes 50 years ago. So plastic chemicals were not needed because they were already natural, kind of, not even replacements. That was it, They didn't need to buy anything. They would just go and they would know what to use for which purpose, either as a shampoo or either as a washing powder. It's just different types of soil.
Exactly.
We don't live in these times anymore.
No. Aside from your grandmother, we live in full alienation.
I wonder how she feels.
I don't know.
So this is my artwork called Was ich mache, meaning what I do. So I was at some point for my diploma unpacking all of my collections that I have been accumulating since years. And I think that I somehow put this presentation together to try to go beyond some things that you would usually see as, okay, this is the artwork and now we talk about it. No, I'm very much interested into how to go back, how to really try to, because I always kind of present my work as like, I do socioeconomic aspects of color systems. How can we see this here is like, how do you see it in this single presentation? It's kind of questionable, but I believe that like all of this, you will see analysis of different color systems in different fields, be it maintenance or household. It will be very present in my work. So if we follow that thread, I think it's very clear that like what are the alternative ways of kind of waste management or private waste management, because of course we are trying to all be aware of what we produce. So what are the, of course, you were talking about the state regulated, waste management. But what about my own, what about me living, for example, with something like this? And if you see something like this, you would say, okay, this is some colorful stuff in the room. Yes, it is very much. But if we try to look at it, what I do here, I use the chemical papers, like these color catcher papers that you would usually put in a washing machine so the colors don't mix. It's very interesting. They promote it like this. The colors don't mix. You could theoretically wash black and white together without it affecting each other. So I kind of really wanted to misuse this system. So I was trying to find everything which could emit pigment in my household. So this is in my home, from like drinks to plants. So there is like tea, frozen berries. I don't know, like this one, for example. Like, so I don't know how to. Like one of them are like really washed ones, but some of them are like, for example, this may sound a bit violent, but I would squeeze a strawberry, put a hot water, then put this color catcher paper. It would catch the color up to some point. And it would also contain part of this object. So it's not representing it. It also kind of keeps the part of this object within itself. So like this palette of my household shows very different pigments that I sampled from, my surrounding. Mm-hmm. Yes, you had some comments there about this before, but...
Well, it's also, I think that you were also saying that like one of them is linked to your grandmother as well. This one that you...
Yeah, this one I don't know how
we can't show it to
I
you.
can show you like this. This one. This is my grandmother's working uniform. So I soaked it in warm water and then I took this pigment. But of course I can name all of them. But this one is interesting because it also has like some parts of, of the things that I collect. So this, like, my works are collections, very much. So I think that, like, I basically work a lot with collecting different items. But it's not only collecting, it's also a bit statistical, not as much as, like, really kind of this kind of trying to collect as many samples of a thing to follow, I don't know, the patterns of consumption. Like, for example, this net that you see here, if you, you're allowed to touch it and, of course, see for yourself that, like, there is a difference in, there is a huge difference in the type of the material. So, for example, the cotton, like, nets, from fruit and vegetables, they are always like used for packing the bio or organic products. But if you look at my installation, there's a lot of plastic, meaning my patterns of like nutrition are really bad in some ways, because there's like much more plastic than organic. So what we are showing here is like just a close-up of the work that you can see here, but also on the left side is what is left after working with this. So there is a huge material that I'm still trying how to deal with it, how to collect it, and how to kind of activate it, because it's, for now, I'm just kind of collecting piles of this. So whenever you are trying to work with this material, because it's industrially made, first of all, if one small part goes out, the whole row goes out. It's a completely different way of making it. So like there is like damage all the time to the work, but the other thing is that it's very transportable. It looks much bigger in real life.
It does.
But it leaves, you know, after working with it, after installing it, it leaves out, it leaves like a specific small materials around it that are kind of problematic, and I'm aware of it, especially when you live with it, you know how much it's hard to clean it. I just try to show you here how it actually, what is after working with it.
I mean, I think what's also like really fascinating about this, I mean, there's a lot of different things. I think, again, it's like you're really interested in these kind of questions of feminized labor and domesticity and production, right? Like, I mean, even the images before of your studio, like you're really interested in demystifying or de-alienating the relationship of studio practice and like what art is and what it actually involves. But also like in the relationship with all those microplastics that are coming off. I mean, first of all, I think what it does is it illustrates the ways in which, you know, I think like in the, in the kind of public consciousness, there's this way in which, as we were talking before, as you alluded to, there's this way in which we think of plastics as lasting forever, right? And it's very unclear how long various kinds of plastics will last for, but the question of lasting, I think, is like an ambiguous one, because I think when we think of like lasting, we think of something sort of lasting in its current shape or its current configuration, and clearly that is not at all what happens with plastic objects. We were talking earlier about the ways in which like so many very famous artworks from the mid-20th century, including like Eva Hesse's work or Noam Galbo's work or other folks' work, it's all falling apart. It's a total nightmare. Plastic is a total nightmare for conservators, for restorers, for the kind of continuation and accumulation of capitalist value of artworks within a kind of commodity system, because they're falling apart to the point where they can no longer be displayed. One of with a collective that I work with, we tried to display some of these objects in the museums, and artists who owned them wouldn't let us because they were they weren't right anymore. And what I love about this is that, I mean, it's not the point of the work to show this material residue of like how it's always falling apart, but there is this kind of constant actual kind of you almost have to intervene to keep it from not falling apart, right? And I love that you're showing us the ways in which it's actually falling apart, and it's and I think it speaks to the plastic condition more broadly, right? Which is plastics are constantly shedding everywhere, right? It's almost like human skin, right? We're just it's shedding every time a car drives by, right? There's little tiny microplastics that go up into the air, and then we're all breathing them in, or it's shedding every time you're washing clothes and it's going down the drain. It's shedding in all of these different ways, and I think we don't. What is so amazing about what you're doing with just a really simple object like the packaging that fruits and vegetables come in, these weird net things, these bags that are created, is you're showing us these processes of how something is being both contained and completely falling apart. Yeah, exactly. Mending them all the time.
I have to mend them all the time. I mean, they are connected, so it's not machine work. I connected them on my own. This one that is on display is the smallest one. Usually they're much bigger. But it's always there's a lot of invisible labor that you have here to keep it the way it should look like. This other question of kind of sustaining or kind of keeping the market level or sustaining this marketable level of artwork, I think it's pretty disturbing. And people not willing to show what happens to their work after some years. We were really discussing, because I also had a close encounter with the restoration department. They wanted me to write how did I make it, out of which material? So I had to make a list for them. I don't know how they would restore this. They don't know either. So we were sitting there and laughing about this, and we were guessing about what is going to fall apart first. So is it, but what is interesting is this moment of timelessness. We think that plastic is timeless, but actually it falls apart. And there are stages of it falling apart that we don't want to see because we are only used to see and want to see the shiny, clean surface, right? But there is also something, I think a set of all acrylic paintings. Like we don't know what will happen to them, like long, or far enough in the future, because it's not only about plastic. It's so many different artworks of contemporary art and objects made out of different materials that. Why do we have to make something which is marketable and easy to restore? I mean, let's challenge this a bit. This is like the collected material for another artwork I will show you. It's the 25 kilo potato bags that I was collecting when I was working completely illegally for a very fancy Austrian tourist destination called Figelmüller. I was a cleaning person there for some time, and there was before my shift, which was 5:30 in the morning, there was another person coming before that was peeling 5 or 6 bags of potatoes, 5 or 6 25 kilo potatoes, and then they would throw all of these bags. I mean, they were most of the time, because of being fast, they were ripped and there were different forms. So because I was managing waste, of course, again, I started collecting them and washing them and reusing them. But the way that I could reuse them was always kind of affected by the way that the person would rip them off. So I would go around these ways of how they would rip them off. And then I made the artworks again, handmade again, now it's hard for people to maybe understand dimensions because I'm really bad with inches, but this is one of these works is 6 meter long and 3.5 high.
That's huge.
That's
and
huge.
I love what I love about it is that in this work in particular, it does feel a little bit like a collaboration with this other worker,
it
right?
Is.
And and because all of the shapes and the ways in which you're having to stitch something back together, the way the kind of predetermined thing, it's it has to do with these traces of labor all throughout the kind of supply chain. And of course, you're dealing with the sort of most immediate aspect of where it kind of turns from a commodity into a waste product. But I think that's what's so fascinating about all of your work. I think is really interested in that kind of question of that moment where it transitions from labor to waste, right, or waste to labor and back again.
But somehow also in a way ready-made, because I don't like to alter that much. I don't want to affect the ways of production that much. This is what we were talking, and especially in this work. I will say something about my involvement or sustaining the involvement from production by this. So on the right side, this is obviously Christina Aguilera in her video Genie in a Bottle. So in 1999, I really wanted to have this necklace so much that I had to make it for myself. This left one is the one that I made out of cotton buds. And then some years afterwards, I felt that I'm kind of affected by the market, by different prevailing narratives. So I wanted to come back to something that I was really doing as a kid when I was honest to myself, when I was not feeding these systems, And then right at this moment, when I realized that was 2019 or something, the cotton buds were targeted. So the plastic grip cotton buds or Q-tips were regulated by a directive of the European Union, which targets regulates the use of single-use plastic. And here, number 1 says cotton bud sticks, except if they fall under the scope of council. Yes, but it's a restriction on placing on the market. So they shouldn't be produce nor place on the market. So what I did, without feeding the market, I was going around and buying the last samples of this plastic grip thing. And was I really affecting the production is something that we can question, but I think in this case, when a material is targeted, or a set of, like, there is a list of 9 of these single-use plastic materials that are targeted, and being like, they don't exist anymore. You cannot buy this in Austria. You cannot find them on Amazon, nowhere. You can find replacements like wood or paper. But this is not interesting. This is not what I'm interested in, because this is too safe, I guess, you know. So this is like a work together with the material, which is growing. And why is it growing? Because this is, of course, so let's say from the right side. On the right side are the non-regulated parts of this material, which is here in the US. So the list of these cotton bud sticks in those colors and the numbers, I bought them here. I remember Natalie asking me on a previous conversation, oh, what will you do when you come here to RU? And I said, I'm going to go and buy out the cotton buds. This is precisely what I did. And like the first photo that you see here, this is how my transportation looks like. So I have to put them out of the package because there is more space then. And then good luck bringing them back to Austria. Let's see how that goes. But like the one in the middle is a documentation of me buying, like in the supermarket in Belgrade. What is interesting here is that you can basically make like geological map or like geopolitical map of availability of this material. I'm always kidding that, like, you know, the border of the use of cotton buds is the border of the third world, you know. But I mean, somehow it is, because it's like going more and more down. For example, there's a lot of in Sri Lanka, but they don't deliver. You cannot buy them. You have to go to Sri Lanka to be able to buy. But like here, you can find them. So this is definitely outside of the EU scope of regulation.
It definitely is.
But I mean, you were saying that it's hard to trace the origin of plastic. Mm-hmm. But what we can trace or mark is how it's regulated.
Yes, definitely.
So I find this at least interesting. That's possible to trace, if not the other thing. So there's one work on display here from cotton bud. So I really try to keep the material as much as possible, not to change it that much. So I am, you know, kind of really much, I would say, based in ready-made tradition. Also, you know, like conceptually, but I also work like this because I like to keep the material as much as possible. But at some point I figured out that, like, when you have a cotton bud and you have the cotton, so I take out the cotton, I always have this moment of kind of, because it's done like this. So there's this gesture of kind of doing, like, you know, people told me, oh, how many did you buy? Like 300. I was like, no, 300 is one package. You have to understand that it's one package. So what I do, I take out the cotton, and then there is a very small part which has some structure that I cut. So there is something in between which is like 5 centimeters long. And then there are like these small leftovers kind of. But leftovers, I love leftovers. So most of this works, and that one behind you is out of my leftovers, my like production leftovers. Now, talking about this moment of how we are affected by these materials and how material itself is affected. First of all, this work features tethered caps. And there is a new regulation that the caps and the rings, they have to be connected. So there is like, it's not possible for me anymore to create an artwork like this. So I have to only work with my material, which I have been collecting since 2012. And so I'm using these bottle cap rings under the bottle cap. And, you know, in order to kind of take them away from the bottle, I have to cut them, but then I have to kind of glue them back. And I glue them back by actually welding by heat somehow. And this is exactly why we come to a slide like this, because during creation of that work and this kind of moment of melting the plastic, I figured out that my body really started being affected by this. I had troubles breathing and so on and so forth. So I went to test myself. The only test you can do now, which is not a tissue test, I mean, it's not like commercialized yet, so we cannot do tests on microplastics, maybe in some labs, maybe, but like it's not commercialized. We cannot do really plastic tests. How do we do a plastic test? So whatever, the doctor sent me to do a test of plastic, and then we figured out that I'm allergic to benzyl peroxide. So this is something which is used in, it's a catalyst in the production of polymers. And actually the moment when it meets is that when you burn plastic, it appears in the fume. So my body was reacting to this artwork that I was producing, and I kind of tried to trace this. So I wanted to show what happens when you work with material like this, how it affects your health in a way. I mean, and when we really come to this moment of affecting the health, this is a work that brought me here to New York. It's called Twisting by the Pool, and it's an installation which was basically a small pool, but it had this substance poured inside to evaporate. And this substance is a very specific one. I mean, I would just point out to this, because if you look very carefully at this image, the connections between the tiles, they are kind of dissolving. So the substance which was there is a cleaning agent, which is sulfamic acid. And this is the standardized professional cleaning agent, so you cannot buy it just like that in a shop. You can only buy it, professional cleaning company can buy it. And then usually undocumented labor uses it. But how do we, because I was also doing this, how is this used? You should be, also stands here very clear, you should be having a full protection, not only gloves, but also mask, and also the, oh my God, I always the glasses.
Or goggles, yeah.
The worst, so the company always tells you, you should spray it because it costs so much. And actually spraying is the worst moment for a worker to work with this material or this agent, because this is the, aerosol is the worst moment. So it's again the fumes, it's again when it's sprayed, it's the worst. And there are people who work with this many years. This is how it looks like after. So I left it to dry there. It ate the connections between the tiles. It went through. And this is how it looks like. It's crystallized, the color kind of is still there. It's a special agent called betazid rosso that I was myself using. That's why I was kind of, I have a very special relation to this smell somehow. But I was trying to face people with these invisible moments that, offices or, office of a person is always prepared. You just come there and it's ready for you. You come there at 9 a.m. and you're like, yeah, amazing. The trash is not there. Everything is clean, smells nice. Yeah, smells nice. But what does this mean to the people who actually make it smell nice? It looks like that. Imagine what this does to hands. I was personally allergic to this, so from my gloves up, I will be all red for some time, and then it would kind of disappear, but it was day by day by day. Where does this come from? I wanted to kind of come back a bit to this work, which follows up this color system in a way, because there's something in professional cleaning called 4-color system, and I learned this when I was sent to a cleaning school by a specific company. And so this system in professional cleaning means that there are 4 colors of cloths, and different areas in space are cleaned with different cloths. So toilet is always red, bathroom is always yellow, office area is always blue. I mean, the point is like how to sustain the maximum level of hygiene. It's all about sanitation and hygiene there.
But sanitation and hygiene for the people who are going to come back, right?
Yes.
Like, and for the workers, as you're so kind of like beautifully and kind of in a horrifying way showing us, it's like a huge amount of toxic burden for the workers, right? So it's like that idea of sanitation is like, okay, like some people get to be clean at the expense of who?
Yes, some people just come there and they complain that, oh, this is not perfectly made. There is still a bit of garbage left. I wanted to tell you some behind story. Like, this system only works, it's presented that it works, but then when you finish this, you put all of these clothes together in a same washing machine. So the toilet and the office, they're washing together. It just looks like it's kind of the system, but actually, if you would really analyze what happens afterwards, I think that people would like on the office tables would also suffer. Maybe it's a revenge, I don't know. Yes, so now we go back to something which is also related to color sampling or pigment sampling, but in a different way because it implies industrial pigment. So there is this factory, steel factory in Smederevo in Serbia, which was owned by the US and now recently by a Chinese owner. And they don't care about ecological standards at all. So this is how this actually looks like. So in Serbia, people started reading headlines in newspapers that there is a red village there somewhere. So I had to go there and I had to see what it is. Yes, it's very red, and this red comes from the factory. So what I did is I tried to face like people with this material. So this wall on the right, it's painted with like river mud. I will show you a bit later what it contains. The collected river mud. And one on the left is like a greenhouse, which I got it replaced for this family that lives the closest to the factory. So they grow food there. This is very it's a part of Serbia which like people grow food a lot. It's very agricultural, this area. But the problem is that people think that if you put a greenhouse over tomatoes or whatever you grow, it will not affect it. So this is a detail of a plant which is under one of those. It's under this. Greenhouse. And then on this show I was serving cherry juice from the region and watermelons. And just to show you what it contains, because I was not analyzing on my own, so I just collected material and gave it for analysis by the Institute for Soil in Serbia. But then the activists with whom I was working, they had another step of kind of trying to interpret these results. And then there is cadmium, for example, which is a cancerogenic substance. Then there is lead, which is much more than it was supposed to be, zinc, and also copper, which is double and a half as much as it should contain it. So it's very dangerous what is there. So we don't see it. There is a huge part of, I somehow always still work on with the visible. Mm-hmm. But there is a huge invisible part which we cannot even see because, for example, I was checking this analysis of regulations saying, yes, you don't have to show what, if it's an apple, you don't have to show what the apple was made of because it's an apple. Yeah, but it's an apple having cadmium. I mean, how do you even work with this? We really now are the times where you cannot take apple for an apple. You need to take apple, analyzed, or like production site analyzed to say, okay, this is apple with cadmium and this is apple with lead. Which one do you like? I mean, it's so this is some kind of moment where we decided to stop.
Yes, exactly.
I don't know.
I mean, I think what you're doing is like so fascinating and interesting, because I think that like it's really playing at that boundary, as you were saying, between like what is visible and what is invisible, and the ways in which chemical, or in that case heavy metal saturation, that's being used through the processes of extraction or through the processes of kind of massive
carelessness
consumerist production. Yeah, exactly. Is really being distributed geographically in these very specific, highly specific ways, right? Like you could do a kind of similar map of the cotton balls, but like, in whose bodies and in whose territories is, lead, cadmium, copper, et cetera, accumulating, as opposed to like, other places where it's not. And I think that what is really, so fascinating and is really hard to do, I think, in an artistic sense, is that you are both really good at kind of keeping that kind of activist orientation of being like, we need to know what's in our food, but at the same time you're presenting it in this fairly seductive way, which I think is really, I mean, from my point of view, I think that that's really useful, right? It draws in people who otherwise wouldn't be interested, right? And like, and like you kind of show us this tarp from this greenhouse that, initially, looks like maybe some kind of, post-conceptual work, or I mean, it is, but like some kind of post-apocalyptic is probably a better word for it. But like it's kind of functioning within the terms of abstraction, right? And I think that there's a certain kind of visual language for that. But then when you actually really look at what it is, it's like you're really bringing these things into a gallery space. You're bringing all of these forms of toxins into a gallery space to kind of ask us, like, how do we grapple with, or what do we do about these kinds of chemical and lead
I always like to
saturations?
mark things that are problematic. I mean, the seductive part is my visual interest, of course. I always wanted to be an abstract painter. I always dreamed to have like this kind of hard edge abstraction. This is my interest. But then I figured out, actually, I cannot go that much into creating these spiritual spaces, because my reality is that I am one of these vulnerable groups that are exactly if affected. So how do I deal with this? How do I deal with this moment of understanding how I am affected, what I can, or preconditioned even, or how, like, I cannot just do it. And after this moment, I realized I cannot just do, pure forms. So I take them as kind of points for discussion that goes beyond, like, why did you take this material? What can this material tell us? Of course, there is some visual interest of mine, which kind of makes it kind of, I don't know, seductive, but actually it's like what goes beyond is important, because I'm also very, like, I'm interested, of course, in ideas, but I'm not there to illustrate ideas, which is what, some art directions also do, which is completely legit. I'm just not this kind of, person. And there are so many discussions and intertextual discussions that I like to, challenge with my work, that are not only, I would use like crochet, which was shown by my mom. I would also build modular structures, but why does it have to be in the way that it has been always used and exhibited in specific places and already has part in art history? How to challenge this, That's my way, because I mean, this is how I live, so I really try to somehow sum up my experience in this, plus add my interest, of course. We can discuss that. Because I'm sometimes criticized, for example, for putting together like this visual aspect together with, the story in the background, like make yourself up, like make a decision what you want to do, because, like the art with tendency or with a with a conclusion. It has to be archival. It has to be black and white copies. I'm like, no, why does it have to be like? We can do it differently. We can Yes. So if you decide that we close up, we can go into questions.
Yeah. Why don't we do that? And if people have questions or
Comments also welcome. Don't be shy.
It was unclear to me what you tested for those metals, that report of the metals. Was it the cherry juice? What was apples?
I tested the soil where it grows. I tested water, and I tested this dust, which is everywhere. So this orange thing, or this orangey reddish thing, which is there, it's not painted. It is 1 year of dust which has been collecting itself from the factory. It's a pure immersive experience of getting into this toxic environment where people live and get cancer after live. Okay, nothing will happen to you if you enter there. There was a lot of discussions how the workers of this gallery will be affected, and they were complaining. And we were really trying to make everyone feel safe about this. It's just if you are in this, if you're living with this many years, inhaling, it really has a effect. But some people didn't want to get into the space. Some people didn't want to try the cherry juice. Some did. Some were like, okay, because this is this agricultural area of Serbia, and many of the products are everywhere. They're just not labeled. So there is a lot that we actually eat without knowing that it comes from that area. So it's spread much more than it looks like, because people are afraid to say where it comes from, because they cannot sell it then, because everyone knows what it is. So I think it just reveals that it's a very complex set of circumstances that affect all of us, but it seems that it's just these people there. No, it's not. It's, I'm sure that we ate, people in Serbia ate this once in their life for sure,
I mean, it reminds me of there's this person called Rachel Lee who's a theorist, and she says that there's this fiction of comfort, and this is part of the reason why we end up in these massively toxic environments. Is that if we fundamentally believe that everything that we are putting out into the world was going to end up in our bodies, then I think we'd have a radically different understanding of what we're doing, right? And it's because for people who have wealth and power and privilege, there's this idea that we can seal ourselves off, that we can have this fiction of comfort. Exactly. And that's the thing, right? Is yes, of course it accumulates more in certain places and in certain people, but nobody is not affected, right? Every single person who's ever done, one of the things you can do actually is do these blood analysis of what kinds of toxins are in your body, and they can show all kinds of things that are, and everybody is exposed. In fact, you can tell people's class status based on what types of chemicals and what kinds of toxicities you're exposed to.
I remember in your text you even say that people with lower income are more prone because
to plasticizers,
because of their lifestyle, because of the not being able to afford these kind of eco or whatever things, and they're more affected by these substances, which doesn't mean that everyone is affected, because everyone is. You cannot escape. If something is happening on the if the if the cotton buds are still sold in Sri Lanka, I mean, what are we doing? And if the space is regulated within EU, then I come here and I buy out I don't know how many packages. I mean, what does this do? So it's these gaps are very interesting also to follow.
Yes.
The spans of this regulation.
So you can bring it back?
Yes. Hopefully. Hopefully.
That's what we were talking about earlier. Please.
I don't. First I was wearing mask, and I was melting it outside. But then, because I didn't have time, I had to do it very fast. I just didn't protect myself, and this is when I realized that it really affects me. But now, I would try to wear a mask, but if I would have to do it, I would do it. So that's I don't know, somehow my work goes very much into investigating the limits of my body. I never thought that I would be the one who is talking about this, but because I think I don't want to talk for people. I think it's much better if I do experiments on myself somehow, and I show through myself some things, for example, allergy to ambrosia. I have this allergy, which, I have allergy to food color. There are some things that I have and I can pursue. It's just very challenging how to do this in I don't want to illustrate this. This is challenging. I need to find artistic form to deal with all of this, because I have been always, for example, allergic to M&Ms. My whole life, I eat M&Ms, and I had started getting different red dots everywhere. So then what I can do, and what I'm kind of almost there to decide to do to myself, is that I figure out which the colors are, I go and get tested, and then I test. Is it, or I start eating only red, I don't know, 1 month, then only yellow, then, but what, why, the other question is, why am I going into this direction where I want to test these limits of my body? Also if I would enter, in August, into the space full of ambrosia, I would I would choke, so my allergy is not that bad, for example, but it will affect me. So how to illustrate this moment, how to make these spaces, how to make these artistic spaces that are dangerous to enter. I find this really, I find it interesting, but I want to deal with it carefully. So it takes a lot of time to say, yes, I will remain with this, and it will affect me, but how do I measure this? Because, for example, there was a person with asthma who entered my flat, and after some time they had to open the window, then it didn't work, then they had to go out. And I didn't even see, but for example, if I had asthma, I could never be in my flat with all of these materials, but it's so interesting, but I don't want other people to suffer. I want to somehow test it on myself. So there are ways to do it. I'm still doubting, but I'm kind of there, I don't know.
I think that's such an interesting ethic, though. It's totally the opposite, I think, of the ways in which certain kinds of, at least in North America, I don't know if this resonates in relationship to Serbia, but the ways in which within North America this kind of white environmentalism has really produced itself in order to try to barricade yourself off, or to make your personal world as clean as possible, right? So you buy organic, and you get the
if you can afford it,
non-formaldehyde. Exactly, this is the thing, right? And it's there's all these NIMBY projects, the factory, the incineration, can't be here, it has to be in a different neighborhood, and I think that what you're doing is the exact opposite. It's instead of trying to barricade yourself off, or instead of sort of saying I'm going to live in as clean of a world as possible in relationship to this toxicity, instead you're kind of pushing at your own body's limits about what you can tolerate. I think that's a really interesting, I think that has a really interesting ethical imperative behind it, because it's really asking us to face the world that we actually live in.
You cannot isolate yourself. How do you isolate? I can try to isolate, but there will be always something that affects you. So I don't have a privilege of living the most green life. I don't believe it green, greenwashing is everywhere. So I guess that we will not go in this direction. I think that some things are just kind of hidden agendas that make even more profit. So I don't believe in green, for example, mining and green minerals. This doesn't exist. Especially me as an artist who loves cobalt, violet. I love it, but what does this do? What does this do? What does it mean that I go into the shop, I buy this very expensive thing, which is a news product of, cobalt mining, and people actually die there. They live their lives in hell. And I come and I'm like, oh my God, I'm in the, kind of Central Europe. I go and buy this amazing, and then I'm amazed by this pigment. No, like we need to find ways, because art was also, painting was always about, painting was always dealing with minerals. Like there is a lot of, I think we really need to talk about this. What does this mean that I get this amazing, mineral to be able to buy it when I can afford it?
Yeah.
And what do I do if I accept to buy it? It's a very tricky moment of how do you even act today? I don't know. Like I ask myself really how to go on sometimes. You have a question.
So in countries where even the economy is regulated, if you're exhibiting in a big, institution, and then how is it goes about a sensitivity warning, or what would you do if there were limitations to what you could exhibit? Because then if certain part of the population would actually be physically affected, what would you do? Or have you had an example like that? Because I can imagine some institutions could go pretty little.
Yeah. Especially the one with this industrial pigment. First it was discussed with the institution. What does this mean to people who will be there as guides, Where will they sit? What can I use? How will they be protected? This was all. So they were standing, being with masks all the time. And people were, warned that if they enter, they're entering this or that, so that they know. And some people didn't, some people didn't take this, or some people entered and didn't want to drink the cherry juice. So people knew, of course. The point is that they knew what, of course, makes it more impactful is that if you enter and you have no clue. But I think this is a bit tricky, because I think that there always needs to be warning or work explanation, or the content of the work with analysis, so that people decide whether they would like to enter or not. Because I would, enter, but I'm not I'm not a measurement for something like this.
But what's interesting too about that is that in the context of an art exhibition, you can then choose, right? And depending upon your own bodily capacities, you can choose or not choose, right? And the thing about the world that we live in is that, there aren't those warnings, right? There isn't the warning next to the truck, or there isn't the warning next to the factory. There isn't the warning next to some former industrial site.
No.
There isn't there's all of these non-warnings in our world, right? There isn't the warning when you go into a newly, furnished or renovated building where it's everything in there is off-gassing, right? And so if you happen to be somebody who's chemically sensitive, you will notice it'll affect you, obviously. Folks like Mel Chen have written really provocatively and beautifully about that, but that there aren't warnings in the regular world. And I think that this is also what you're highlighting, right? Is in this one instance, you get to choose. But the folks who live there and who are growing their vegetables there, they're not,
But
there is no consent process, right?
There is instances where you cannot choose. Because you have to live there, and you have to take this cleaning job no matter what. And you have to eat that tomato there, because this family actually moved after some time there. They moved to another country.
Wow.
Because they didn't want, so they really it's really happening.
Yes.
That climate refugees. It's not climate refugees.
It's there's toxic refugees or something, or pollution refugees.
Pollution refugees are happening.
Yeah.
And we think it's not there yet, but yes, people are dislocating willingly or mostly unwillingly from the spaces that they were inhabiting for, or their parents or their grandparents. They have to leave their land because
Yes.
it happens more like immensely in different communities. This was just one example, one case study. It relates a lot with, you know, like indigenous peoples, like fights for the land, which is also like completely another story. I just kind of showed that in this unregulated space, the periphery of Europe, this non-regulated EU space, which wants to become an EU country, it's a lot of problems that people don't know about. There is like this very interesting Raw Minerals Act that European Commission would like to vote next year about the, basically, as far as I understood, the European Union countries, if they really need one of the materials for their prosperity, they could invade other country. And as, for example, and there are many mines that will open in the periphery. So, for example, I believe that Serbia, which is a candidate for EU, will get like an offer, or not really offer that they cannot deny, to, you know, open the mines so that they could get into. It's like, it's very tricky, the times we're living in. Sometimes I really think that we're in Middle Ages, but then the Middle Ages actually never ended. There is a whole struggle about minerals, which is so interesting. I kind of thought that we're over, that we're behind that. No, it's just even more and
starting.
more like present. It really sounds like Middle Ages. I mean, right? It's like 21st century Middle Ages.
Other questions, comments? If not, should we have some pie?
Yes, we'll definitely have a pie. The ones that are allowed to be affected by a lot of gluten, grandma style, please dive in. And thank you everyone for coming. Let's continue our talk with works. You're allowed to touch them, so all fine.